So my name's Denise. I'm a registered nutritionist and I specialize in women's health, hormones, and the menstrual cycle. I'm also a yoga teacher and the author of the book, You Can Have a Better Period. I've worked with hundreds of different women with different hormone and menstrual health conditions, including PCOS. So let's get into what PCOS is. So we're going to just start very wide and then we'll start to narrow in. So PCOS is actually one of the most common reproductive health conditions in the UK. It affects about 10% of women and people with periods of reproductive age in the UK. So if you go to the doctor and you say, I think I might have PCOS, they will use something called the Rotterdam criteria as a diagnostic tool. And they'll be looking to see if you have irregular periods, you have high androgen levels, so high male hormones. And if they were to look at your ovaries on an ultrasound, they would be looking to see if you have ovarian cysts. And I know that there's a lot of kind of doom and gloom around PCOS, and especially around fertility, where there's I think what I've heard from a lot of my clients is there's a real negativity about being able to get pregnant if you have PCOS. And I can assure you that, there's a lot that you can do to get pregnant and to manage your fertility, even with PCOS. I've had many clients with PCOS who have gone on to have children, have multiple children, manage their condition, and manage their fertility. Even if you're not looking to go down a fertility pathway, nutrition, lifestyle, and supplements can really do a lot to help you reduce and manage the symptoms of PCOS. So let's talk about the key symptoms of PCOS, and then we'll start to break things down a little bit. So we can kind of break these down into the different areas. So high androgen symptoms, these are the hirsutism. So the excess hair that we might see on the face, around the kind of the cheeks and the chin, the neck, the chest, the abdomen, the back, and this is typically quite dark and it's quite coarse. You also will see with high androgen PCOS, acne on the face, especially around the jaw and the neck, on the back, on the chest, oily skin. You'll also see hair thinning. So typically around this area, or what we call male pattern baldness. Then looking at cycle-based symptoms. So they're typically very irregular periods. So we'll talk about what a menstrual cycle looks like shortly. But with my clients with PCOS, some of them, when they've come to work with me, their menstrual cycles were anywhere between about 50 to 90 days. So menstrual cycle being from the day of your period when it starts all the way through to the day before your next period starts. So anywhere between 45 to 90 days, and that makes your periods very irregular. You can have menstrual cycles where you don't ovulate. So ovulation being that point in the middle where you release an egg from one of your two ovaries, the mature egg from one of the two ovaries. And that's how you make progesterone, which is a very calming anti-inflammatory hormone. And then we get kind of into the blood sugar related symptoms. Blood sugar dysregulation is a big one. And this can lead to fainting, dizziness, this feeling of hunger if you don't eat. So hunger plus anger if you don't eat something straight away. And of course, really, really strong sugar cravings. High cholesterol levels can be another part of having high insulin levels. So this insulin resistant PCOS. Weight gain, difficulty losing weight. And then we have some mood-based symptoms. So because of those long menstrual cycles that I just described, there can be an issue towards the end of the menstrual cycle where there's not enough progesterone, which is this very calming anti-inflammatory hormone that helps you stay in a kind of even keel. And that can lead to anxiety, that can lead to feelings of depression, especially with very long menstrual cycles. So we're talking like 45 plus days. And then for some women, some people, there can be difficulty conceiving, but that is not an inevitable part of having PCOS. One thing to say is that pain is not a typical symptom of PCOS. So you can have painful periods and you can experience painful ovulation, but as a kind of in the round, pain isn't a classic symptom of PCOS like it would be with endometriosis or fibroids or adenomyosis. The symptoms of PCOS typically appear around puberty, but what happens is that PCOS can sometimes get misdiagnosed because as a teen, it can be quite common to have irregular menstrual cycles or longer menstrual cycles where the body is trying to work out the level of hormones that it needs to make. And so this can sometimes be mistaken for PCOS. And then what I've seen in some of my clients is that they get put on the pill to help regulate the menstrual cycle, when what we then discover is that they didn't actually have PCOS. They just had a typical teenage irregular period that was trying to find its way to like its normal. So if we kind of take a step back a little bit and then look at the wider menstrual cycle. And this is really important because if we understand our menstrual cycle, it can give us more experience or more information about the different symptoms that we might experience within PCOS. And also it gives you a better understanding of ovulation and what that looks like and how to optimize that for yourself. This is really important because our menstrual cycle and our period are our fifth vital sign. So this is a vital sign is a key indicator of the status of our overall health. So your other four vital signs are blood pressure, breathing rate, heart rate, and temperature. And if you think about those four vital signs, when something goes amiss, you know that there's something going on with your health. So if your blood pressure is really high, that's a sign, okay, something is going wrong. If your temperature goes really high or goes really low, that's a sign, that there's something going on. It's really important for us to think about our menstrual cycle and our period in the same way. So this isn't just me making this up. The American College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists has called our periods and our menstrual cycle the fifth vital sign. So understanding what this looks like for you is really important and will help you if you're trying to find a diagnosis or you're trying to better manage your current PCOS symptoms. So if we talk about the menstrual cycle, what we're talking about the four phases. And we're looking for anywhere between 21 to about 35 days. So from when your period starts to the day before your next period starts, anywhere between 21 and 35 days. And those kind of really long, like 35, typically about 45 day plus menstrual cycles are kind of a classic symptom of PCOS. Then if we look at each of the four phases, we see a typical time that we should expect for each phase. And so the first phase, our menstrual phase, is our period. And This is anywhere between 3 to 7 days, ideally. And then we go into our follicular phase or our inner spring, and that's anywhere between 6 to 11 days. Ovulation, and although this is only one day, this encompasses this rise in hormones that we experience around this time. And ideally, this is a kind of peak of our energy, our mood. And this is one of the most important parts that we need to be supporting with PCOS, healthy ovulation. And then finally, the luteal phase or our inner autumn. For some people with PCOS, this can be really, really long. And this is where some of the mood symptoms come in, because during ovulation, that's when you release progesterone. And if you haven't ovulated or you haven't released enough progesterone, or this luteal phase is very long, this can lead to anxiety. This can lead to depression. And this is why optimizing, adding in nutrients that support ovulation is so important for PCOS. So from a hormonal perspective, we see a lot of hormonal changes happening during each phase of the menstrual cycle. And so if you look at this blue line here, this is this release of progesterone that I've mentioned. It gets released after ovulation. And then in an ideal situation, we're riding that wave of calming progesterone that helps our sleep all the way through to the end of our menstrual cycle. We have estrogen, which peaks right before we ovulate and then has a second smaller peak after we ovulate. You have testosterone, which is this purple line here, which peaks just before ovulation. And so for certain types of PCOS, there can be too much testosterone, leading to some of the symptoms that we've been discussing, the dark horse hair, the acne, the oily skin, the issues with hair loss. And so we'll discuss how we optimize testosterone levels later on in today's workshop. And then we have two other hormones that are typically related. They are related to fertility and ovulation. So you have the green line here, which is follicle stimulating hormone. This is the hormone that helps all of those follicles, immature follicles that are in our ovaries, gradually over 270 days turn into the mature egg that is released during ovulation. And you have luteinizing hormone, this one here in yellow, that peaks just before ovulation. That's the hormone that says to the body, okay, it's time to ovulate. So there's a lot going on hormonally, but this is really interesting because these hormones, there's a lot that we can gain from understanding what's going on hormonally, but understanding the changes of each phase, because these hormones affect our mood, both positively and it can be negatively, our energy levels, our appetite, our sociability, our cognitive ability, immune health, our libido, our exercise capacity. So there's so many different elements of our lives, our bodies, our brains that are affected by these hormones. So where we're trying to get to with PCOS management is a cycle that looks a bit like this. And this is definitely possible. I've worked with a lot of women with PCOS, and we've been able to reduce the length of the cycle. One of my clients had a cycle that was about 90 days, and we got it down to about 35 days. So it is possible to have a shorter menstrual cycle where, you menstruate regularly. When you do have your period, it's a really even flow, that's not super heavy. The color is bright red for most of the flow. So think kind of a cranberry color. There's not a lot of pain that happens. We hear a lot of conversation about period pain and how that's normal. It's not really. So a few light cramps, a few aches, that's quite common. But having a really painful period isn't a normal part of having a period. And then energy, part of optimizing PCOS or managing PCOS symptoms is also managing energy and getting to a place where you're not completely depleted right before your period, that you feel great, especially during ovulation, and that you don't get into these low lows that I see with PCOS. Ovulation, we're looking for it midway through the menstrual cycle. It's not always on day 14. And that's really important in terms of testing. And we'll talk about that in a second. Your cervical fluid. So that's the fluid that you will see when you wipe after you finish your period. That's connected to the rise of estrogen. That's really important, not only for fertility, but it's also a sign that you're making enough estrogen. So it changes after your period finishes. And we have something called peak cervical fluids, peak cervical mucus, and it's very much like egg white. And this is important because it tells you that you're making enough estrogen. If you were to track your temperature, your basal body temperature, what you would see is a difference in the temperature before you ovulate and then after you ovulate. Your temperature would start to rise after ovulation. And then there would be these kind of steady mood. Maybe you're more sociable, more outgoing during your inner spring. So after you finish your period and around ovulation. And then maybe before your period and during your period, there's a more inward focus. Maybe you're more introspective. So those kind of shifts, positive mood shifts that we're aiming for, rather than the lows that I see a lot with PCOS. This is what we're looking to move towards, and it definitely is possible. So to talk about PCOS, I think effectively, we have to dive into the different types of PCOS, because what you might have experienced going to the GP is there's quite a generic discussion about PCOS where it's about, losing weight, blood sugar management, ovarian cysts. And I think what we also have to understand is that PCOS can affect all of us differently. So there's no one size fits all. And it's really important to establish the type of PCOS you're dealing with, because this will help you better manage your symptoms. And it's also important to say that some of the symptoms of PCOS, they overlap with other conditions. So for example, if you're not ovulating, it's not necessarily PCOS. It could be an underactive thyroid. It could be stress. It could also be something called hypothalamic amenorrhea, where it's basically a missing period. And sometimes I see this where someone has had a really long menstrual cycle, so 90 plus days, and they just think, oh, I probably just have PCOS. And it goes on, but actually their periods have gone missing. And that's hypothalamic amenorrhea. Or so other overlapping conditions around high androgens. So that could just be, and I suggest, be a male hormone imbalance. High androgens are also something that we see in menopause. Then high insulin levels, are a symptom of type 2 diabetes. They can also be a result of certain forms of medication. So to find your PCOS type, it's really important to have the right blood tests done. And so we'll go through these blood tests. So if you go to the GP, you know exactly what to request. And just to also say that what I see quite frequently is women being diagnosed with PCOS only based on an ultrasound that shows that there are ovarian cysts present. You can have ovarian cysts and not have PCOS. You can have ovarian cysts and have PCOS, but you can also have PCOS and not have ovarian cysts. So there's 3 different pathways that we can potentially go down here. So blood testing. So we're looking at blood testing around blood sugar. So fasting insulin, HbA1c, which it's a test that looks at how your body has been able to manage the sugar going through the blood over the last 3 months. So it's a much more of a broader test. And this is what the NHS might do in the first instance. And then they might do fasting insulin, or they might do fasting glucose. And then cholesterol panel. So we know that there can be issues with cholesterol with certain types of PCOS. So it's so helpful to look at what's going on. So we have total cholesterol, and then we have the different types of cholesterol. So we have HDL, which is the beneficial form of cholesterol protein. Then we have LDL, which is typically quite high with certain types of PCOS. And it's not very beneficial. And then you have triglycerides, androgens. So with some types of PCOS, these can be quite high. So testosterone, and you have different types of testosterone. You have free, which is what the body is able to use, and total, which is all the testosterone that is currently in your system. And then you have androstenedione, GHEAS, and then a free androgen index. All of these markers are really valuable for understanding the presence of androgens and the levels in the body, especially if you have the symptoms around high androgen PCOS. So the facial hair, the oily skin, the acne, the male pattern baldness, the thinning hair. Then looking at the thyroid, this is really interesting because the research shows us that there can be an overlap between thyroid symptoms and PCOS. But equally, one of the symptoms of an underactive thyroid is irregular periods, is fatigue, is low energy, it's sluggishness. So having a thyroid panel done that tells you what's going on with your thyroid, which is this gland here at the base of the throat, is really, really valuable. So these are all these markers here. What I see in the NHS is typically they will look at TSH and they'll look at T4 in the first instance. And then you may have to kind of prod them to go a little bit deeper. Then looking at what's going on with some of the other sex hormones. So what we want to look at is your sex hormones on certain days of your menstrual cycle. If you think back to that graph that I showed you that looked at the rise and fall of those hormones across each part of your menstrual cycle, we want to look to see if estrogen is low when it's supposed to be low, and if progesterone is high when it's supposed to be high. So we want to test estrogen, luteinizing hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone on day 2 to 3 of the menstrual cycle, which is day 2 to 3 of your period. And then you want to look at progesterone and potentially estrogen again 7 days after ovulation. You can also look at a protein called sex hormone binding globulin, which is really important to tell us about the balance between testosterone and estrogen 7 days after ovulation. Now, if your cycles are very regular or you don't know when you ovulate, you can have all of these sex hormones that I just mentioned tested irrespective of whatever cycle day you're on. And then if you're working with a skilled practitioner, they'll be able to extrapolate the information, the results based on where what they would expect to see. It's also really helpful to rule out some of the other conditions that I discussed earlier. So blood tests are really helpful for finding the whole picture. So let's talk about the different types of PCOS. So I've been alluding to this, and now let's get into them. So we have 4 types of PCOS. We have high androgen or adrenal PCOS. You might see it in known by one of these 2 names. You have insulin resistant PCOS, inflammatory PCOS, and post-pill PCOS. So your high androgen, your adrenal PCOS, this is the kind of classic PCOS symptoms that I've been referring to. The acne, the oily skin, the dark coarse hair, the hair loss. And on a blood test, you will see high androgen. So those male hormones that I've been referring to, those will be high on the blood test. What you also might see is high blood sugar markers as well. And this is because there's a vicious cycle between having high androgen levels, such as testosterone, and that having an impact on how the body is able to manage insulin. But with this type of PCOS, it's the high androgen symptoms that predominate. So this is what I mentioned earlier. So this vicious cycle where you have high cortisol, which is our primary stress hormone, creating a situation where it's increasing androgen levels, and then that is dysregulating how the body is able to manage insulin, which is this hormone that helps us manage the sugar that we eat in our food, and is produced in the pancreas. This creates a situation where it's just very stressful for the body. And then we have high cortisol levels persisting. So it's a vicious cycle that we can break through food, through lifestyle, and through supplementation. Then we move on to insulin resistant PCOS. This is the most common type of PCOS. And the symptoms that we see here, they're noted in between 50 to 70% of PCOS patients. And when doctors talk about PCOS, they typically are talking about this form of PCOS, really thinking about that kind of, when they talk about difficulty losing weight, sugar cravings, energy dips, fatigue, and then overlaying some of the other symptoms, such as irregular periods, lack of ovulation, and then some of the androgen symptoms that I mentioned. So you can have the high androgen symptoms, but it's these symptoms of blood sugar dysregulation that predominate. And so some of you might experience late in the afternoon, say like 3, 4 o'clock, you might have this big energy dip. And then that could have you reaching for biscuit or chocolate to try to prop up your energy levels. And you might get to a point where if you don't have something, you can start to feel dizzy or you might faint because the body is looking for sugar because it's not managing the sugar correctly. So it's trying to find ways to prop up the energy. And so on the blood test that we've been talking about, we'll see the high blood sugar markers, so the high HbA1c, issues around fasting insulin, issues around fasting glucose. And then this will also have an impact on cholesterol. So there will be typically what I see as high LDL cholesterol and low HDL cholesterol. And so we have this vicious cycle where you have the cells in the body that are supposed to respond well to receiving insulin in preparation for getting sugar from what we've eaten. They don't respond well to them. And so the cells can't use the sugar or the glucose from the blood for energy. The pancreas tries to make more insulin because it thinks, okay, maybe this is an issue with insulin. We just need to make more to try to get that glucose into the cells. And then the cells, they continue to resist this insulin. The sugar stays in the blood and insulin levels stay high. We can break this cycle through food, through supplementation, and through lifestyle changes. What you might have experienced if you go to the GP is that they might give you metformin as a tool for blood sugar management. And this can be really effective, but there are some side effects to metformin. And we'll talk about other ways that other tools that you might manage blood sugar shortly. So we have inflammatory PCOS. And so this is really interesting because this isn't a kind of typical form of PCOS that gets discussed, but you have some of the classic symptoms of PCOS around the menstrual cycle, low menstrual cycle, irregular periods, and some of the issues around having high androgen levels. And this is typically driven by chronic inflammation. So inflammation is a bit of a buzzword in the health space right now, but all it means is that the body is trying to get to a place where our immune system can fight bacteria, it can fight viruses, it can heal cuts, and it can heal wounds. So it's constantly buzzing away in the background, but it kind of upregulates as needed for cases of acute inflammation. But we have situations now where it's chronic inflammation, where our immune system continues to act as though there's threat. And this damages cells in our body and leads to low menstrual cycles, irregular menstrual cycles, lack of ovulation. You might notice that it's harder to recover from colds and flu. You might notice that there are digestive issues. So it might be bloating, constipation, might be diarrhea. And so on blood tests, you will see a marker called CRP. And that's a kind of level of general marker of inflammation that will be high. Prolactin will be high as well. Prolactin is a hormone that we produce in the brain, and it's high in cases of chronic stress. You'll also see high androgen levels as well. You won't see insulin resistance with this form of PCOS. And this is where this is what can cause some confusion, where doctors will be looking for sugar cravings. They'll be looking for weight around the middle, difficulty losing weight. And you don't typically have that with this form of PCOS. And then finally, you have post-pill PCOS. And this is the result of taking some form of hormonal contraception, which suppress communication between the ovaries and the brain, and that stops ovulation. And after you come off of hormonal contraception, this suppressed communication, it can persist. And in some cases, it can lead to a rise in testosterone. And it can lead to a delay in the return of menstruation. It can also be the result of undiagnosed PCOS prior to going on the pill. So what you're looking for is really long menstrual cycles, not ovulating. You're looking for high androgen symptoms. So those are the 4 forms of PCOS, the 4 types of PCOS. And so now what we're going to look at is how we manage those 4 types of PCOS. It's important to say that what we eat each day has a powerful impact on our hormones. So our food provides the scaffolding that our body uses to make our hormones. It provides the scaffolding for hormones like estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, testosterone. And then we have 3 opportunities each day, each meal, to add in foods that are really beneficial for so many aspects of our health and to help manage symptoms of PCOS. For every type of PCOS, blood sugar balancing is super important. It's the kind of foundation that we can build upon. We're really looking at how we can increase insulin sensitivity. We're also looking at how blood sugar balancing can help reduce cortisol. It can help impact testosterone levels, and it can help reduce inflammation. All of this helps us break the vicious cycle of insulin resistance and the impact that has on the hormones in our body. So we talked about high cortisol, high androgens, with high insulin. All of that can exacerbate the symptoms of PCOS that we've been discussing. So let's talk about breakfast. I'd like you to just think about the time that you eat your first meal. What studies tell us is that people who skip breakfast, they have a disrupted cortisol rhythm. So cortisol is our primary stress hormone, and it's supposed to be high first thing in the morning, because that's what gets us up out of bed. But then it's supposed to gradually decline throughout the day. People who skip breakfast, and then drink coffee, for example, that exacerbates that high cortisol levels. And then that can lead to some of those vicious cycles that we went through. This can make us have an exaggerated stress response throughout the day. So our resilience can feel a little bit lower. Things can feel a little bit harder. When you're adding in breakfast, this immediately lowers stress levels. It gradually reduces cortisol levels. It helps manage blood sugar levels, and it can do wonders for your mood. So if you take anything from today's workshop, I would love it for you to, if you're not eating breakfast, to start eating breakfast. If you're having coffee for breakfast, have something to eat with it. If you're having coffee before your breakfast, have your coffee with your breakfast. All of those things will do wonders for your cortisol levels and your blood sugar regulation. Because when we don't eat breakfast, we go on this roller coaster throughout the day. This unmanaged blood sugar levels, it causes us to go kind of like we're on at Thorpe Park on a roller coaster, going highs and lows. And those highs and lows we feel in our energy, we feel in our mood. So that 11 a.m., that 3 p.m. crash where we feel tired, we feel hangry, we feel lethargic, a lot of that can be mitigated through blood sugar regulation. And it's quite a clinical thing to talk about, but that simply means adding in foods that help you move to a place where you're more in rolling hills rather than a roller coaster, high and low. And what a really important way to do this is to connect with your hunger and with your fullness. So noticing what hunger feels like for you. And as you're eating, noticing what fullness feels like for you. In the morning, eating within 30 minutes to an hour of waking up. And then adding a bit more intention and mindfulness to the way that you eat. So you're sitting at a table, you're chewing, I'm not going to say chew each bite 30 to 40 times. I was at a talk last week and someone was saying that we should chew each bite 50 times, which I think is like, I think that takes some of the pleasure out of eating. But I think at the very minimum, you're looking to chew each bite at least 5 times. You're not gulping down your food. You're putting your knife and fork or your spoon down, and you're just slowing down, because all of this helps us connect back with what it feels like to be full. Because what I see a lot is that connection can be blunted because we eat on a schedule, or we eat on the go, or we get to a place where we're ignoring our hunger signals because we're so busy. We just work through lunch, or sometimes we forget to eat. I'm never in that position. I never forget to eat, but it surprises me how often I hear that, oh, I just forgot to eat. And all of that can create a disconnect with our hunger signals and then what it feels like to be full. And when we connect with our hunger and fullness, what this does is it allows us to better manage our blood sugar levels. And that has a knock-on effect on our mood, our cortisol levels, and then helps us better manage PCOS symptoms because we're not tired. We're not tired all the time. We're not craving sugar. These simple things can make a really big difference. But then it's also thinking about what you actually eat. So we need to eat 3 meals a day. You might hear a lot about intermittent fasting. For PCOS, I never recommend intermittent fasting. Any type of PCOS, I never recommend intermittent fasting because it's very, very stressful on the body. We're thinking about at each meal, what can we add in? Eating enough protein, eating enough fat, eating enough fiber, and eating enough green. Adding all of these elements and thinking them like a tick list when you put your plate together will be really helpful for managing your blood sugar levels and reducing sugar cravings. Fiber specifically is so beneficial because what I see a lot with PCOS is constipation. And dietary fiber helps keep us regular. You might hear some people say, oh, eat 30 grams of fiber every day. But that's like that number can feel very abstract. It simply means Eat more fruit and vegetables with the peel on. Add in more nuts. Add in more seeds. If you like them, eat more pulses. Eat more beans, brown rice, brown bread. And just thinking about every meal as an opportunity to add in these foods that are nourishing so many different aspects of your health. If you have high androgen symptoms, so the symptoms around the skin, the hair, these are some strategies that you might try to help reduce androgen, but also reduce cortisol. So adding in foods with zinc can be really powerful because zinc can help reduce testosterone levels or manage, it can help testosterone conversion. So it's a healthy level of testosterone. It's very anti-inflammatory, and it also helps with ovulation and progesterone production. So pumpkin seeds, organic red meat, eggs, seafood are all really great sources of zinc. Then you might look at dairy. So I'm very much about what you can add in, but for some people, taking out dairy might be beneficial, especially if they have oily skin and acne, because dairy has something called, so where cow's milk dairy has something called IGF-1, which insulin growth factor, which can increase sebum, so the oil, and increase oily skin. And increased sebum can also be a symptom of high testosterone. Then looking at adding foods with DIM. So this is diindolylmethane methane. And this is a compound that is very, very helpful for reducing androgens. And it's also very, very anti-inflammatory. So kale, broccoli, chard, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, all really, really helpful for getting in this nutrient that can help reduce testosterone levels. And then finally, a really easy one is spearmint tea. So some small studies have shown that spearmint tea can help reduce androgen levels. So having 2 cups a day, you get loose spearmint tea, you steep it, you put 2 tablespoons in, you let it steep for 10 minutes, and that can be quite helpful, and it can feel quite easy. So just talking about inflammation, there are lots of different things that exacerbate inflammation in our modern life. Lots of sugar, stress, lack of sleep, binge drinking, and poor gut health. And there are lots of things that we can do to help reduce inflammation. Looking at the quality of our sleep, being mindful about how we drink alcohol, how we eat, how much sugar we eat, not smoking, adding in practices that help manage and reduce stress, and also just thinking about making your plate as brightly colored as possible, because all of those colors in the fruit and veg have a really powerful effect on reducing inflammation. Looking at our gut health is so powerful as well. About 60 to 70% of our immune system, our immune cells are in our gut. And so when we support our gut health, we can help reduce inflammation, support our immune system. It supports our mental health, which I know can be an issue with PCOS, supports our digestive system, and it also supports our overall hormone health. And so when we talk about the gut, I like to think about it like a garden. So what are you doing to feed the bacteria, all of the beneficial bacteria that are already there? So this is the fertilizer. So the high fiber foods that you can add in. And then what are the new plants that you're adding in? So the seeds, the fermented foods that you're adding in to make the garden of your gut as diverse as possible. A really healthy, diverse gut with lots of different types of bacteria. It has so many benefits for so many aspects of our health, including reducing inflammation. So supplements are really valuable as well, but I think it's really important to think of them like the cherry on top of the cake. Lipolife make amazing supplements that can really help manage PCOS symptoms. So if you use the code LENISE20, LENISE20, you get 20% off any of the lipolife supplements that you purchase. If you go onto the lipolife Instagram page tomorrow, they are doing a giveaway for CoQ10, which is a really powerful antioxidant that's so helpful for supporting ovulation and high quality eggs. And also zinc, which we just talked about, really powerful anti-androgen and really supportive for ovulation and progesterone production. So check out the lipolife Instagram page tomorrow for the giveaway of those two supplements. So these 4 supplements can be really, really interesting for managing PCOS symptoms. A really good multivitamin with a B vitamin complex can be really helpful for reducing androgen levels and for helping to lower cholesterol levels and also managing mood and energy. You have quercetin, which is a powerful antioxidant and a powerful anti-inflammatory. It helps reduce testosterone, the negative testosterone conversion that can lead to hair loss and acne and dark, coarse hair. Curcumin, which we typically find in turmeric, very, very powerful anti-inflammatory and antioxidant, so helpful for reducing cortisol levels. And then finally, we have magnesium, which is so great for reducing insulin resistance and managing blood sugar levels. If you have anxiety or you're experiencing painful periods or painful ovulation, this is really helpful as well. Another supplement that is really helpful for PCOS symptoms is inositol, but you want to make sure you're taking the right type of inositol. So inositol, it helps improve insulin sensitivity throughout the body. Inositol, which can be a little bit more expensive, is really important for improving insulin and signaling within the ovary. So that's really interesting for helping to support ovulation and support progesterone production. So we have about 5 minutes left. And before we get into questions, I just want to show you a simple breathing practice that you can do anytime, anywhere, because part of managing stress is looking at how you breathe. And that simple inhale in through your nose and exhale out through your nose can really have a powerful effect on your nervous system, reducing cortisol levels and taking you out of fight or flight. So something you can do anytime, anywhere is, say if you're on the tube, if you're on the car, if you're on at your desk, is put your both feet flat on the floor, put your hands on your lap, and start by noticing your breath, inhaling in through your nose, exhaling out through your nose. taking a long, full inhale in through your nose and a long, full exhale out through your nose. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Come back to your natural inhale and exhale, and just notice how you feel. Before we get to questions, in summary, understanding your PCOS type can help you better manage any PCOS symptoms you experience. You can have ovarian cysts and not have PCOS. You can have PCOS and not have ovarian cysts. That's really important if you're on a pathway to diagnosis. Blood tests are very important for PCOS diagnosis, and managing blood sugar is a really important foundation for PCOS management. Are there any questions? Just you can drop your questions in the chat box, in the Q&A. So how do I spell the last two supplements? So we have curcumin. I'll just flip back to the page that we were on so you can see curcumin, and we have magnesium. And what's really great about the lipolife magnesium is that it's made from magnesium glycinate. And so it works on the entire body. If you're dealing with constipation, you want to look for magnesium called the magnesium citrate. So hopefully this will help you to better understand your PCOS symptoms. If you're on a pathway to diagnosis, helping you understand the conversation that you need to have with your GP and help empower you in that situation so you can ask questions that are a little bit more detailed, a little bit more informed, and will help you get the result that you're looking for. As I mentioned, there's a giveaway on the lipolife Instagram page tomorrow, so check that out. If you want a 20% discount, use the code LENISE20 for 20% off. And any questions, my email is here. Just send me any questions. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Thank you for taking an hour out of your evening. And I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Thank you, everyone.